بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. طبعا اسمي سعيد محمد إبراهيم رباع من الركيز يطا. في تاريخ 17/4/2025 جاء المستوطنين 3 معهم حتى يدخلوا في أرضي حوالي 25 متر داخل أرضي، وأخذوا يحفروا مشان يعني تكون هذه الأرض لهم. فكانت أنا عرضت هذا الكلام، قلت لهم هذه أرضي وشو بيسووا فيها في هذه الأرض؟ هذه أرضي زيادة ماشي لي، ما توسم مني. ابني كان يصور إلياس، فبعد ما كان يصور هجم عليه مستوطن منهم، فهجم عليه خنق خنق شديد، فقربت عليه حتى أبعد هذا المستوطن عن ابني، وحتى معاه M16، فطخ طلقتين في الهواء ثم طخ الطلقة الأخيرة في رجلي حتى صوبني.
The shooting of Sheikh Saeed took place on our first day on the ground in Masafer Yatta, a rural community in the South Hebron Hills of the West Bank, Palestine. The modern insurgent dispatched a reporter to the scene specifically due to the escalation of violence in recent years. We arrived to find him on the ground bleeding and held up by his son Elias, whilst other distraught family members argued with Israeli soldiers for not taking action against those responsible. The armed assailant, Benjamin Bodenheimer, head of the security for the nearby Israeli settlement of Avigail, which is considered illegal under international law, walked around freely, seemingly confident there would be no accountability for his actions. Other residents from nearby Palestinian villages began to arrive following the news of the shooting, including a first responder who was initially prevented from tending to Sheikh Saeed. Though he was soon able to reach him, the delay could have proven fatal due to the severity of his injuries. Additional Israeli soldiers and armed settlers in military fatigues arrived and began to push back members of the Palestinian community, prompting further tensions and resentment towards the Israeli authorities. Many of the settlers in the West Bank were conscripted and armed by the IDF in response to attacks carried out by Hamas on October 7, 2023. While this heated exchange continued, Israeli paramedics proceeded to place Sheikh Saeed onto a stretcher and load him into an ambulance. Though he was to be treated for his injuries, he was also under arrest, accused of assault. Likewise, his son Elias, a minor, was also accused of violence and was subsequently arrested. His first day in detention was spent in an unknown location, blindfolded and shackled with nothing other than stale bread to eat. Sheikh Saeed was taken to Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba in Israel for emergency surgery, resulting in the amputation of his leg. Whilst he recovered there for 3 days, he was handcuffed to his hospital bed. After appearing in a military court, a judge ordered Sheikh Saeed and Elias to pay 5,000 shekels each, around £1,100 or $1,500, for bail to avoid a prison sentence. Benjamin Bodenheimer, however, faced no repercussions for his actions. What took place in Sheikh Saeed's olive grove is a poignant example of the escalation in violence used by Israeli settlers as part of the ongoing encroachment on Palestinian land in Masafer Yatta, and those who live on these enforced boundaries of occupied land are effectively on the front line of, and victim to, the efforts of settlers who continue to take more. But like many of the residents of Masafer Yatta, Sheikh Saeed resides on land that has been in his family for generations, since long before the creation of the Israeli state. Following his recovery, We spoke to him at his family home in Al Raqiz about his connection to the land and the threat of settlers and the occupation.
مواليد ال 65 سنة ال 65. أبوي 1925. جدي 1890. إلي أبو وأبوه وأبوي إلي أبو كذلك. هذه الأرض كلها كانت لسيدي لجدي وبعدها لأبي وبعدها أنا. فأنا استلمت هذه الأرض من أبوي، وكنا هذه الأرض في البداية كانت على الدواب، على الحمير وعلى البغال، ولكن بعدها على التطور الحديث على التراكتورات يقتلعون من هذه الأرض، ولكن مستحيل إن نترك هذه الأرض أو نفرط فيها، نتركها أو نفرط فيها. ولكن هذا المستوطن نفسه منين أجى؟ ايش أجى؟ أنا بتحداهم بالواحد إنه يعرف هذا الإنسان منه، مش عارف نفسه، كيف يعرف أبيه؟ كيف يعرف جده؟ 2025 عندما ولد أبي، 1890 عندما ولد جدي، أين كان؟ أين كان هذا المجرم الذي في نظر الناس يهيمن على الأرض؟ طبعا مشاكلهم هم، مش مشاكلي أنا مش صاحب مشكلة. من المتسبب؟ من الذي بدأ بالمشكلة؟ أنا ما عندي مشكلة، أنا في أرضي وأرض أبوي وأرض جدي، ولكن المشكلة هم اللي جاءوا بالمشكلة. مشكلتهم هم معي، مش مشكلتي أنا معهم. وبعدها بقول روح، يعني ما استفدت من هذا. ليه؟ لأنه المستوطن هو مستوطن، وكذلك الشرطي مستوطن، وكذلك الجندي مستوطن، وكذلك القاضي مستوطن.
The unpredictability and spontaneity of settler and occupational violence mean that uncertainty and anxiety are pervasive feelings amongst the Palestinian community. This, in itself, is a tactic of the occupation. And in addition to outright violence, one of the ways this is implemented is through the use of aggressions in the form of harassment and intimidation. A clear example of this was seen in Al Raqiz with the presence of Amahai Shiloh from the nearby illegal settlement of Avagail, who regularly enters Sheikh Saeed's land armed with his fully automatic rifle. Shiloh's routine begins by grazing his herd of sheep and goats near the family home, gradually getting closer, ensuring his presence is known. He then makes his way to the family's olive grove, where his livestock will graze on the family's olive and fruit trees. This is not only an attack on the family's livelihood, but is also an act of provocation, encouraging confrontation that will then justify a response from occupational forces. False accusations, however, will achieve the same result. First, settler conscripts arrive. In response to the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, the IDF enlisted settlers across the West Bank en masse. Though they gained little legal authority, they gained considerable firepower. According to Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's far-right Minister of National Security, Israel has distributed over 120,000 firearms to settlers in the West Bank. Then, an official IDF soldier.
If I have to come here again because you were pestering his sheep or other sheep, you will be in trouble. Do you understand? תיאמתם עבודה עם המתק? مش فاهم מתק, את יודעת מה זה?
احكي عربي تفهمش عبراني. أنا بدي أسقي زيتون، بدي أحط مي.
אני מבין. אתם כדי להיות פה אתם צריכים להיות מתואמים עם המתק.
תפסיר לי, أنا هو أحكي عربي.
אז לכי תביאי מישהו שמדבר עברית. דחקה, היברו, yeah?
On this occasion, the situation did not escalate further. It is unclear whether our presence played a part in this. What was certain, however, was that Amahai Shiloh would return again. Shiloh's regular presence in this olive grove is part of a long-term plan. Settlers are waiting for the right opportunity to seize this piece of land. This is what they attempted to do on the night of Sheikh Saeed's shooting. Although they were unable to achieve this, they inflicted life-changing injuries, and their efforts remained continuous and relentless. Settlers approaching Palestinian residents while their animals graze is another example of daily aggressions, as is parking near Palestinian homes, sitting and watching. For the settlers, seizing land in Al-Raqiz is tactical and strategic. It not only allows further encroachment into Palestinian territory, but also puts additional pressure on the residents who already live precariously on the front line of occupation. This, however, is only one front line within Masafer Yatta. To get a better understanding of the wider scale of the situation in Masafer Yatta, we spoke with Mohammed Rabbi, head of the 2nd Rural Council, who acts in a similar role to a mayor for a number of villages in Masafer Yatta. We met at the Civil Defence Volunteer Centre in Atwani. Shortly after Mohammed Rabbi's arrival, Israeli soldiers appeared and took an interest in us. They congregated outside and created an air of tension and anxiety. But thankfully, after some time, they were called elsewhere, so we were able to continue. We agreed to take the interview indoors.
حاليا أنا في الفترة الثانية في آخر سنة، يعني في السنة يعني ل7 سنوات رئيس مجلس في توري. شو دوري في التلقي، شو الخدمة اللي بنقدمها، وشو دور المجلس في المجتمع؟ هو تقديم الخدمات الأساسية للسكان بشكل أساسي، اللي هي قطاع البنى التحتية، المياه، الكهرباء، الاتصالات، وزائد التعليم والصحة، وزائد اللي هي كمان المخططات سواء التفصيلية أو الهيكلية، أو كمان مخططات المساحة لتسوية الأراضي. كمان إنه دور في كون إنه المجلس موجود في منطقة مسافر يطا تحت ظل احتلال وعربدة مستوطنين واعتداءات من كل نوع من خلال حكومة الاحتلال. كمان إحنا دورنا مهم في تعزيز صمود المواطن بكل الوسائل المتاحة. واثنين، توفير الخدمة الأساسية. طبعا إحنا بنحكي على خدمات اللي هي الحد الأدنى للخدمات في هاي المناطق، وخصوصا إحنا في ظل وجود الاحتلال بطابع إجرامي. إحنا بنحكي إنه تقريبا ما يقارب من 3 سنتين إنه الناس تقريبا محرومة من كل شيء، من الحركة، من التنقل، من كل وسائل الحياة اللي بيعيشها كل إنسان مفروض يكون موجود في أي بقعة في الأرض. الشعب الفلسطيني في منطقة مسافر يطا هو تقريبا محروم من كل شيء، محروم من الحرية، محروم من الحركة، محروم كمان من العيش بأمان داخل في متلاي منزله. لأن أنت بتحكي اليوم على دولة احتلالية شعارها القتل والتدمير والتخريب والتهجير بشكل أساسي. طبعا احنا هذه أعباء في متلاي موجودة كلها أغلبها على المجلس المحلي، اللي طبعا بيحاول يساعد بجميع الوسائل من ناحية تقديم الملفات القانونية، الجوانب المخططات، طلبات الترخيص اللي عماله حاليا بيستغلوا في متلاي الهدم السريع بقرارات عسكرية، زي اللي صار في متل عنهان في التواني، انه قرارات جديدة اللي هي اما بتهدم بايدك يا اما بتدفع ثمن الهدم اللي بيقوم فيه الاحتلال الاسرائيلي. وزي الاعتداءات المستوطنين، عندنا نموذج اللي هو الشيخ سعيد اللي فقد ساقه. بنحكي عن عشرات الاشخاص اللي تم اعتقالهم، واللي تم لغاية اليوم في متل منهم الجريح، ومنهم المعتقل، ومنهم اللي كمان تم التنكيل فيه من خلال إصابات المستوطنين أو هدم بيته وكل حياته في متل بالكامل. فإحنا دائما نعزز صمود الناس، نخلق لهم في متل البديل. يعني إحنا وجود كل مواطن فلسطيني في منطقة مسافر يطا وتشبثه في أرضه هو إنجاز أو رأس المال اللي أنت بتقف في متلاي وراء كل مواطن. لأنه الناس طبيعتها ناس بسيطة في مسافر يطا، يعني قاعدة بتدوري على حياة موجودة في أرضها، علما إنه كل قطعة أرض، كل إنسان ساكن فيها هي ملك إله، ملك في متلاي تاريخي من أبوه، من جده، من أساس العيلة اللي هو موجود منها. فهو بؤمن بالحق فبؤمن إنه هذا فهمت علي حقه. اثنين، طبيعة كمان الناس تتحمل جميع أنواع الظروف. بنحكي عن مجتمعات تحملت إرهاب وتطرف المستوطنين باعتداء الشامل عليها وعلى أطفالها وعلى نسائها. بنحكي على تجمعات فقدت عدد كبير جدا ومساحات شاسعة من الأراضي وتم طردهم منها. بنحكي عن مواطنين تم التنكيل فيهم على المداخل والمخارج. بنحكي عن مواطنين.
Masafer Yatta is a predominantly rural community, with its population residing in a number of villages and hamlets that spread across a landscape of rocky hills and deep swaying valleys. Using the topography to their advantage, illegal settlers have strategically placed themselves on higher ground to assert themselves and cut off Palestinian communities from each other. This is especially apparent by the use of outposts, which are settler encampments often consisting of tents, living vehicles, sheds and other pop-up structures. Under threat from these encampments, individual Palestinian families become especially vulnerable. On the edge of the village of Shiabal sits the family home of Mohammed Abed. Across the valley is an outpost, an extension of the Abigail settlement. What started as one semi-converted bus has now grown considerably. But the expansion continues, and is encroaching ever closer to the family home of Mohammed Abed. Quickly, a pattern of settler activity emerges. What was seen on Sheikh Saeed's land is also seen here. Settlers routinely grazing sheep and goats close to the family home. Going back and forth. And sometimes not going anywhere. Other times, they will just drive through, or make you feel watched. And like in al-Raqiz, interactions with settlers aren't confined to intimidation and harassment. Mohammed Abed and his family have been subject to numerous violent attacks. Subsequently, every interaction comes with the anticipation of something much worse. The largest of the illegal settlements in Masafer Yatta is Havat Ma'on. Established in 1991, it has grown to dominate the landscape, towering over the Palestinian village of Atwani. Though Israeli soldiers, police and settlers are present throughout Masafer Yatta, Havat Ma'on is the epicenter of the occupation. Settlers grazing on Palestinian land is a daily occurrence, as is the destruction of olive and fruit trees. Coordinated attacks of settlers and occupational forces also take place, beginning with confrontation, then breaking a fence, followed by stone throwing. And continued with soldiers firing live ammunition. Following this attack in Atwani, the same settlers moved on to continue their violent outburst in the village of Halat Adaba. Israeli police and soldiers subsequently made their way to the village. However, they arrived not with the intention of stopping the attack, but to arrest multiple residents under false allegations of violence towards the settlers. Multiple Palestinians sustained injuries during both attacks. One of the most detrimental attacks on the Palestinian community is demolitions, which are used as a method of forced dispossession. As Masafer Yatta is in Area C of the West Bank and was declared a military flying zone in 1980, Palestinian construction or building of any kind is strictly forbidden by the Israeli authorities. Though the destruction of Palestinian homes is nothing new, there has been a significant rise in authorised demolition orders being issued, many with vague timeframes. Consequently, residents live in fear that tomorrow they could wake up to a demolition team outside of their homes. Making matters worse, whilst residents clear up the wreckage, the Israeli authorities invoice residents for the cost of the demolition. Historically, Palestinians have also used caves for housing, and due to this threat of forced dispossession, many residents excavate new caves in hopes of maintaining some element of security. On the morning of May 5th, Palestinian residents were ordered by the Israeli authorities, accompanied by a large cohort of military and police, to quickly pack their belongings and leave, or face arrest. In little more than a few hours, the community lay in ruin. Everything was destroyed, not only homes, but also the infrastructure the residents rely on for basic necessities and to maintain their livelihoods, including caves, water storage tanks and water wells, toilet rooms, animal barns, hundreds of metres of agricultural fencing, and a community centre. While surrounded by soldiers, families had no choice but to helplessly watch as their homes were reduced to rubble. Soldiers repeatedly hassled journalists and other members of the press for where they were standing while documenting the demolition. Once the demolition had finished, and the Israeli military and police had left the area, few buildings remained. With nowhere else to go, residents returned and began to search for salvageable materials to rebuild their shattered lives. Throughout our time on the ground in Masafer Yatta, something wholly significant could be seen that was impossible to not acknowledge. Despite the great hardship that comes with living under military occupation and settler violence, the Palestinian residents not only remain, but they continue to embrace life, aligned with their identity and a connection to the land. This is maintained through Samud, a Palestinian cultural value, ideological framework, and political strategy, meaning steadfastness. For many in the community, so long as they continue to work and tend to the land, preserve cultural and spiritual values, and nurture youthful innocence expressed through play, laughter and joy, the occupation has failed. This does not detract from the severity of the challenges, dangers and uncertainty that lie ahead. Indeed, the situation here, and throughout the rest of Palestine, is arguably worse than ever before. But for now, they remain. And under such difficult circumstances, residence acts as a form of resistance.
هم من بدأوا بالمشكلة. أولا بدأوا ب يعني إدخال الغنم إلى الأرض المزروعة زيتون، وهذا معروف. الزيتون هو شجرة السلام. الزيتون هي شجرة السلام، ولكن هم يرعوا شجرة السلام، يكسروا شجر السلام، بل يقطعوا شجر السلام. إذن ما بدأوا بالسلام، بل بدأوا بالعنف، بدأوا بالظلم، بدأوا بالطغيان في الأرض.